Welcome back to Family Quiet Story. I'm glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. It always means a lot to see how far these stories travel. Now settle in, because this one is heavy, and it's true to its bones. It's a story about a mother's quiet plan, a father's grief, and a truth that refused to stay buried. My name is Harold. I'm 67 years old, and this is the story of how my late wife reached out from beyond the grave to expose the people who destroyed our family. Let me take you back to where it all started. I met my wife Margaret in the summer of 1979 at a county fair in rural Ohio. She was working the ticket booth by the Ferris wheel. I was 20, fresh out of trade school, working as an electrician's apprentice. She had a laugh that could make you forget every bad thing that had ever happened to you. We got married 11 months later, bought a small house in Dayton with a mortgage that felt like a mountain. But we were happy. We had each other, and that was enough. Our daughter Karen was born in 1982. She was a difficult baby, colicky, never slept through the night, the kind of infant who could test even the most patient of parents. But Margaret never once complained, not that I ever heard. She had this quiet, steady way of handling things, like a river that just keeps flowing no matter what gets thrown into it, no matter how many sleepless nights it cost her. 3 years later came our son David. He was the easy one. Slept through the night at 6 weeks old. Always smiling, always the first to charm a room full of strangers. Teachers loved him, neighbors loved him, everybody loved David. Looking back now, with everything I know, I wonder if that was part of the problem all along. Everyone loved David a little too much, and he learned early on exactly how to use that. I built up my own electrical contracting business starting in 1991. It wasn't easy in the early years. There were times I wasn't sure we'd make payroll, weeks I lay awake doing math in my head, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving steady work for something of my own. Margaret kept the books, handled the billing, ran the office. She had a head for numbers I never had, and more than that, she had a calm about her that kept me steady when I wanted to panic. By 2005, we had 23 employees and contracts with 3 major construction companies in the region. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. The house was paid off, we'd helped Karen through nursing school, and built what we thought was a solid retirement fund. The kind of thing you spend 30 years working toward without ever quite believing you'll get there. David, meanwhile, had gone into finance, got his MBA from Ohio State, landed a job at a big investment firm in Columbus. He called every Sunday, told us about his promotions, his new car, his corner office with a view of the city. He always had a story about some deal he'd closed, some client who trusted only him. My buddies at the lodge used to say, "You raised a good one there. That boy's going places." He was going places, all right. Just not the places we thought. The first sign that something was wrong came in 2014. Margaret had handled our personal finances for 40 years. She knew every penny that came in and went out, down to the last dollar of a grocery bill. But that spring, she started noticing things that didn't add up. One evening, she looked up from her laptop and asked me if I'd moved money out of our savings account. I hadn't touched it. There was a transfer she didn't remember making, $12,000, sent to an account she'd never seen in her life. We sat there staring at the screen, both of us confused, and figured it had to be some kind of bank error. David offered to look into it. He was in finance after all. Who better to sort out a banking mistake? "Don't worry about it, Mom," he told her over the phone. "These things happen. I'll make some calls." A week later, he reported back that it was all fixed. Just a glitch in the system. The money was back where it belonged. We believed him. Why wouldn't we? He was our son. But Margaret wasn't fully satisfied. She started watching our accounts more closely, and that's when she began noticing other things. Small at first, a withdrawal here, a transfer there, always small enough to explain away, and always happening at times when David had access to our financial information. She didn't tell me any of this. Not then, not for a long while. I know now that Margaret spent most of 2015 quietly investigating on her own, working through it in the hours when I thought she was resting or watching her shows. She requested old bank statements, cross-referenced them against our records line by line, made calls to financial institutions pretending to be a confused old woman asking about her own accounts, playing a part so convincingly that not one person on the other end of those calls ever suspected a thing. What she found broke her heart in ways I don't think ever fully healed, even before the cancer came. David had been quietly taking money from us for years. It started small, maybe 2008 or 2009, a few $100s here and there, easy to miss, easy to explain. By 2014, it had grown to tens of thousands a year. He'd opened a joint account in her name without her knowledge, forged her signature on the paperwork with a steadiness that told me he'd practiced it, and used that account as a channel to move our money quietly into his own pocket. When Margaret finally sat down and added it all up, every transfer, every withdrawal, every forged document, the total came to over $300,000. Our retirement, our security, the nest egg we'd built over decades of early mornings and late nights, our trust in our own child, all of it gone, siphoned away a little at a time by someone who called us every Sunday and told us he loved us. Here's the part I still can't quite understand. Margaret didn't confront him. She didn't come to me either, even though we had shared a bed and a life for nearly 40 years by then. Instead, she did something I never would have expected from the woman I thought I knew completely. She started quietly building a case, the way you'd build a house, one careful board at a time, never letting anyone see the frame until it was finished. I didn't learn about any of this until after she died. For 3 years, she gathered evidence, bank statements, comparisons of the forged signatures against her real one, emails David had sent from our home computer that she recovered from a cloud backup, phone records, a full timeline of every theft going back nearly a decade. She kept it all in a small lockbox, the same one she always told me held nothing more than old family papers and her grandmother's jewelry. The same one our daughter Karen tried to snatch out of my hands 3 days after the funeral, urging me to just throw it away. I should tell you about Karen. My daughter has always been different from David. Where he was charming and ambitious, she was practical and kind, or so I believed. She became a nurse, working in geriatric care, spending her days helping elderly patients hold on to their dignity. When Margaret first got sick in late 2017, Karen insisted on being her primary caregiver. She moved back home, took a leave from her job, devoted herself entirely to her mother's care, or so it seemed to everyone watching from the outside, including me. "Let me handle this, Dad," she told me, her voice full of what I believed was love. "You've got the business to run. Mom needs round-the-clock attention, and I know what I'm doing. I do this every day for strangers. Let me do it for my own mother." I was grateful, so grateful. My wife was dying of pancreatic cancer, and my daughter had seemingly given up her whole life to be there for her. Except she hadn't given up anything at all. She'd seen an opportunity. Karen had been in contact with David for months before Margaret's diagnosis. The two of them had planned this together, my own children. David would keep quietly draining our accounts while Karen positioned herself to control Margaret's care and eventually the estate. I learned all of this from Margaret's files. She had recorded phone conversations, sitting in the next room with her own phone held close, catching every word. She had photographed text messages on Karen's phone while Karen thought she was sound asleep down the hall. She had documented medication schedules in careful handwriting that didn't match what the doctors had actually prescribed, cross-checking pill counts against dates in a small notebook she kept hidden. My wife suspected that Karen was deliberately under-medicating her, hastening her own mother's death while playing the part of the devoted daughter for anyone who happened to be watching. When I read that line in Margaret's notes, I had to stop. I went out to the garage and sat in the dark for 2 hours. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. These were my children. The babies I'd held in the delivery room. The kids I'd taught to ride bikes, helped with homework, walked down the aisle at their weddings. How do you make peace with something like that? You don't. You can't. You just keep going, because there's no other choice left to you. Margaret died on March the 15th, 2018. She was 63 years old, far too young, and I still remember the exact color of the light in that hospital room when she took her last breath. How quiet everything became afterward. At the funeral, David gave a eulogy that left the whole room in tears. his voice cracking at all the right moments. He talked about her strength, her kindness, how she'd taught him the meaning of integrity, a word I would later learn he had no real understanding of at all. I sat in the front pew, numb with grief, and listened to my son lie to a church full of people who loved her, and I still had no idea what the truth actually was. Karen handled the reception that day, moving through the crowd of mourners with practiced grace. She was gracious, thanking everyone for coming, accepting condolences with just the right amount of sadness in her voice and her eyes. The kind of performance I now realized she'd had years of practice giving. At one point, she put her arm around me and said, "We'll get through this together, Dad. We're family." 3 days later, I found the lockbox. Margaret had hidden the key inside the hollow base of a lamp I'd built for her 30 years earlier. Back when I was still learning woodworking, still clumsy with the tools, still trying to prove I could make something with my own hands worth keeping. It was a place only I would ever think to look, a private joke between us about my early, uneven woodwork. There was a note tucked in with the key. It said, "Harold, read everything before you do anything. I love you. I'm sorry." I spent the next 3 days going through those files. 3 days of disbelief, rage, and grief so deep it felt like drowning. My wife had spent the last years of her life quietly documenting our children's betrayal, all while smiling at them across the dinner table, all while letting them believe they were getting away with it. Why didn't she just tell me? I found my answer in her final letter. "My dear Harold," she wrote, "I know you're asking why I kept this from you. The answer is simple. I know you. If I had told you what I discovered, you would have confronted them immediately. You would have raged and accused, and they would have had time to cover their tracks. I needed to build an airtight case, and I needed them to feel safe enough to keep going. Their own greed became the evidence against them. By the time you read this, there will be no way for them to deny it, no way to explain it away, no way to make you doubt what you're seeing. The proof is all here. Every transaction, every lie, every betrayal. Take it to someone who can actually help, not the local police. They'll write it off as a family matter. Go to Raymond Chen at Chen & Associates. He's an attorney who specializes in financial crimes and elder abuse. I met with him in secret 2 years ago. He has copies of everything. He's waiting for your call. I love you more than I could ever put into words. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry our children turned out this way. But I will not let them take from you what we spent our whole lives building. Not while there's breath in my body, and now, even after there isn't. Yours forever, Margaret." I called Raymond Chen the very next morning, my hands shaking so badly I had to dial the number twice. His office sat in a plain, unremarkable building in downtown Columbus, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. He was a small man, maybe in his mid-50s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a manner that made me feel, for the first time in weeks, like someone was finally on my side. "I've been expecting you, Mr. Patterson," he said as I sat down, motioning for me to take the chair across from his desk. Though I hoped this day would never come, I hoped honestly that Margaret would beat this thing and we'd never need to have this conversation at all. He already knew everything. Margaret had met with him 6 times over 2 years, updating him each time as she gathered more evidence. He had notarized copies of every document, authenticated records of every forged signature, and expert analysis breaking down the financial transactions one by one. "Your wife was remarkable," he told me, and something in the way he said it made it clear he meant every word. "I've practiced law for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone build a case this thorough, this patient. She thought of everything, down to the smallest detail." "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked. It was the question that kept echoing through my head over and over. Raymond leaned back in his chair. "She said you'd ask that. She told me to tell you this. Harold loves too hard and forgives too easily. Our children would have cried and apologized, and he would have given them another chance, and another, and another, until there was nothing left to give. She wanted to make sure that couldn't happen." I sat there in his office holding my wife's letter in both hands, reading Raymond's words over and over, and I realized she was right about me. Right in a way that stung. If David had looked me in the eye and said he was sorry, If Karen had broken down in tears and blamed it all on financial pressure or the stress of caregiving, I would have tried to understand. I would have made excuses for them, found some way to explain it all away, because that's what parents do. That's what I had always done. Margaret knew me better than I knew myself, better than I think I ever gave her credit for while she was alive. "So what do we do now?" I asked. Raymond opened a folder on his desk. "Now we make some calls. The FBI has a financial crimes division, and what your son did crosses state lines, which makes it federal. Your daughter's actions with your wife's medication are even more serious. That's potential manslaughter. Manslaughter. If they could prove she had deliberately withheld or altered her mother's medication and that it contributed to Margaret's death, and that she did it for financial gain. That wasn't simply abuse anymore. That was criminal in the deepest sense. The FBI investigation took 14 months. During that time, I had to pretend everything was normal, which turned out to be the longest performance of my life. I had Sunday dinners with my children, sitting across the table from them and passing the potatoes like nothing in the world was wrong. I accepted their concerned phone calls. I let them believe I was just a grieving old man who had no idea what was happening around him, a man who could be managed and steered and quietly put out to pasture. It was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, harder even than burying my wife, because at least grief was honest. This was pretending every single day while I carried the truth like a stone in my chest. David kept bringing up the house. "You know, Dad, you really shouldn't be living alone in that big place. Have you thought about selling, moving somewhere smaller, maybe a retirement community with people your own age?" He said it so gently, so reasonably, that if I hadn't known better, I'd have thought he was genuinely worried about me. Karen kept pushing to be added to my bank accounts just in case of an emergency. "Dad, what if something happens to you? I need to be able to help. I'm a nurse. I know how fast things can go wrong at your age." I smiled, nodded, said I'd think about it, the same way I'd nodded and smiled through 100 Sunday dinners that year. And every single night I went home to an empty house, sat at the same kitchen table where Margaret used to do our books, read through her letters again by lamplight, and remembered exactly why I was doing this. The arrest happened on September 22nd, 2019. FBI agents picked up David at his office in Columbus, walking him out past his own colleagues in handcuffs while people who had trusted him with their savings watched in stunned silence. Investigators found evidence of financial crimes stretching back 15 years, not only against us, but against other elderly clients he had advised through his firm over the years. People who had trusted him the same way we once did. The total came to nearly $2 million. Karen was arrested at her apartment that same morning, before she'd even had her coffee. Alongside the abuse charges tied to Margaret's care, investigators found evidence that she had done the very same thing to 3 other elderly patients over the course of her nursing career, hastening their deaths and helping family members gain early access to their estates, always taking a cut for herself in exchange for her silence and her help. My daughter was a serial killer. My son was a con artist. And my wife had known and had spent her final days on this earth, weak and in pain, making absolutely certain they couldn't escape justice. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified on the 4th day, sitting in a hard wooden chair with a microphone too close to my mouth, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. My children sat together at the defense table, dressed neatly, coached by their lawyers on how to appear. And for the first time since their arrest, I made myself look them in the eye. Karen was crying, silent tears running down a face I had kissed 1,000 times as a child. David looked angry, indignant, like some part of him still couldn't believe this was actually happening to him, like the world owed him an apology for the inconvenience. The prosecutor walked me through Margaret's evidence, piece by piece, laying it out on a large screen for the jury to see. The forged signatures side by side with Margaret's real ones. The difference is obvious once you knew to look. The fraudulent accounts opened in her name without her ever signing a single true signature for them. The recorded phone conversations where my children discussed, quite openly and without a hint of shame, how they planned to manage me once Margaret was gone, how long they thought I had left, what the house might be worth. "Mr. Patterson," the prosecutor said, turning to face me directly, Your wife documented all of this over a period of 3 years while she was dying of cancer. Did you have any idea what she was doing? No, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Not until I found the lockbox. And how did that make you feel? I looked out at the jury, 12 ordinary people trying to make sense of something senseless. Something that probably kept a few of them up at night during that trial. Proud, I said. My wife was the strongest person I have ever known. She spent her last years making sure the truth would come out, even while her own body was failing her. She couldn't save herself from the cancer, but she saved me from something worse. She saved whoever my children might have victimized next. She did what I couldn't do. She looked at the children we raised together and saw them clearly without a parent's blindness standing in the way. And what about your feelings toward your children now? I turned to face David and Karen directly. Karen wouldn't meet my eyes. David glared back at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something cold underneath all the charm he'd worn his entire life. I loved the children I thought I had, I said, but those children never really existed. What's sitting at that table are strangers wearing my children's faces. I don't know them. I'm not sure I ever truly did. The jury deliberated for 2 days, 2 of the longest days of my life, spent pacing the hallway outside the courtroom, unable to eat, barely able to sleep. They found both David and Karen guilty on every charge. David received 23 years in federal prison. Karen received life without the possibility of parole. As they were led away in handcuffs, Karen finally turned and looked at me, her eyes searching my face for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe just acknowledgement that I was still her father. "Daddy," she said, and for one brief moment she sounded exactly like my little girl again, the one who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms and press her face into my shirt until the thunder passed. I looked away. I couldn't let myself hold on to that moment. Couldn't let it soften anything. Margaret's voice was in my head, reminding me exactly why I couldn't afford to weaken now. Not after everything she'd sacrificed to get us here. That was 5 years ago. I sold the house in Dayton not long after. The house where we'd raised both our children, where I'd taught them to ride bikes in the driveway and helped them with homework at the kitchen table. Too many memories. Too many ghosts in every room. Some good, some now unbearable to look at. I live in a small apartment now, in a town where nobody knows my story, where I'm just an old man who waters his plants and nods at his neighbors. I have a cat named Chester who sleeps on Margaret's side of the bed, and some nights I talk to him the way I used to talk to her. I visit her grave every Sunday. I tell her about my week, about whatever book I'm reading, about the little garden I keep going on my balcony. Tomatoes mostly, because she always loved growing tomatoes. I tell her I understand now, fully, why she did what she did. People sometimes ask me how I survived it. How do you keep living when everything you believed about your own family turns out to be a lie, built on top of another lie? I don't really have a good answer for that. Not one that fits neatly into a sentence. You just do. You wake up each morning, whether you feel like it or not, and you put one foot in front of the other, and you find small things to be grateful for. Sunlight coming through a window. A good cup of coffee, black, the way Margaret always made it. The simple knowledge that the truth came out in the end, even if it took everything to get there, even if it cost me both my children in the process. Margaret used to say that secrets are like splinters. You can ignore them for a while, tell yourself they don't hurt, but sooner or later they work their way to the surface. And it's always worse the longer you wait. She was right about that, just like she was right about most things in our 40 years together. That lockbox should have stayed hidden, at least as far as my daughter was concerned. She tried her best to make sure it did, reaching for it the moment my back was turned, urging me to just let it go, let her mother rest. But Margaret understood something Karen never did, something I only came to understand myself after months of reading and rereading her words. Some truths are simply too important to stay buried, no matter how much pain digging them up might cause. The people who hurt you most may be the people you love most. The ones you trust completely may end up being the ones who betray you worst of all. And sometimes the only justice you'll ever get is the justice you quietly build yourself piece by piece in secret, while the people who wronged you believe they've already won and there's nothing left to fear. Margaret built that justice with her dying breath, working in the margins of whatever strength the cancer left her each day. And even though she's gone now, her work remains standing, solid as anything I ever built with my own two hands. I miss her every single day, more than I know how to say, but I know she's at peace now. She finished what she started. She protected me, even from myself, even from my own instinct to forgive too easily and love too hard. So tell me, where are you watching from tonight? And do you believe family should always be trusted without question? Or do you think that some secrets, like some people, deserve to be brought into the light? Let me know in the comments below. If this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one waiting to be told, more quiet truths still waiting to see the light of day. Until next time, this has been Family Quiet Story, and this was my wife's quiet revenge. Take care of each other, and I'll see you soon.